You might have um, seen, and you might have been incredibly, respectful during the early stages of dating. You know, you gave the other person space, you communicated thoughtfully, you were conscious of their needs. Then the relationship becomes secure, and you begin thinking this person is not going to go, anywhere. They know me and they should accept me exactly as I am. Of course, they should accept that you are human. They should know that you have difficult emotions. They should understand that you will sometimes have bad days, but acceptance doesn't mean unlimited permission. Your partner can understand, and I'm taking an example of a partner. You can use this example for a friend, use it in different situations. The other person can understand your anger without becoming the target of it. They can understand your anger, but they don't have to become the target of it. They can understand your jealousy, but they don't have to accept your controlling behavior. They can understand your insecurity, but they don't have to be responsible for constantly reassuring you. They can understand your fear, but they don't have to organize their entire life around keeping you comfortable. Your shadow deserves understanding, but your behavior still requires accountability. You have to take responsibility for your behavior, you know? And there are many different shadows we can encounter. And I don't think we need to view any of them as inherently evil. Fear is one of the biggest ones. You might carry a fear that people won't like you, that, fear can lead to people pleasing. Uh, and because of that people pleasing, you will fear that some people might not be pleased with you, right? And then that can lead to constantly monitoring how you are perceived, struggling to say no, over explaining yourself, changing your behavior depending on who you're around. And eventually you might start thinking that this is simply your personality. You might say, oh, I'm just a nice person, but sometimes underneath excessive people pleasing is a very understandable fear. If people don't like me, I might lose them. If I disappoint someone, they'll reject me. If I stand up for myself, I'll become the difficult person. The work isn't to shame yourself for having that fear. The work is to understand it. Okay, and then same. Let's talk about anger. Anger can be incredibly useful because it can tell us that something isn't okay. But when anger isn't regulated, it can turn into aggression, resentment, now hostility, or even like, a pattern of hurting people, or jealousy, which can alert us to insecurity or fear of loss. When it becomes unregulated, it can turn into possessiveness, suspicion, control, envy, reveals something we genuinely want in our lives, but when we don't know how to work with it, we may start devaluing the person who has what we want, or secretly, wishing they would lose it. Shame. Shame is another shadow which can sometimes help us recognize when we have violated our own values. But excessive shame can turn into, there is something fundamentally wrong with me. And when shame is projected outward, it can become shaming other people. Lust, which is a natural part of human desire, but without awareness and boundaries, desire can become objectification, objectifying the other gender, leading you to sometimes, disregard someone's autonomy. Desire for power. When we desire for power, I always connect it with, sense of agency. We need to feel powerful in certain situations, right? We need healthy relationship with our own power, with our own agency. But when that desire becomes unregulated, it can turn into manipulation, domination, exploitation. So again, the goal isn't to become a person who has none of these experiences. The goal is to become conscious of them. Sometimes, the environment activates parts of us, which is why it is so important to understand who you surround yourself with. Okay. And this is something I've been learning. Uh, is that we aren't necessarily going to respond the same way in every environment. You might feel very regulated when you're alone. You might understand yourself quite well. You might feel confident, peaceful, and secure. Then you enter a particular relationship or social environment, and suddenly you're in a completely different state. You are more afraid. You start overthinking. You worry about, being rejected. You feel like you need to please everyone. You become hyper aware of what other people think of you. Or perhaps you become angry and defensive. And this doesn't necessarily mean that all your self work has disappeared. It can simply mean that something in that environment has activated a part of you that doesn't get activated when you're alone. And I think this is why relationships can become such powerful mirrors. Sometimes, when you interact with someone and you feel triggered, another person isn't creating the entire reaction you're having. They may be touching something that already exists inside you. The wound is not healed. And again, that doesn't mean we should blame ourselves for everything that happens in relationships. Other people can genuinely behave badly. Sometimes it's not even your trigger. you know Other people can actually violate your boundaries and they can actually hurt you. But alongside asking what did this person do, we can sometimes ask what happened inside me when this occurred. What did I suddenly believe about myself? What was I afraid would happen? Why did this situation affect me so deeply? And those questions can lead us somewhere much more useful than simply trying to change the other person. And I think we spend so much time trying to understand other people. I think this is one of the biggest reasons I find self understanding so important. We spend so much time trying to understand everyone else. We analyze their behavior. We study their messages. We try to figure out their intentions. We wonder why they don't communicate properly. We wonder why they aren't changing. And sometimes we become experts on other people's psychology while remaining strangers to our own. We know exactly what everyone else should be doing, but we don't always know what is happening inside us. And this is why I think my father's death affected my understanding of shadow work so deeply. I thought I knew myself. Then, grief revealed another layer. It showed me that life can bring circumstances that, activate emotions and fears you didn't even know were sitting inside you. And I think that's true for many major life experiences: loss, relationships, rejection, success, failure, loneliness, change of any kind. All of these can reveal parts of ourselves. So instead of thinking I need to figure everyone else out, perhaps sometimes the more powerful question is, can I understand myself? Because when you understand yourself more deeply, you become less dependent on the outside world to tell you who you are. Okay. So if knowing your shadow doesn't mean letting it control you, what do we actually do with it? Let's talk about that because again, when we talk about, shadows and everything, I'm not asking you to suppress it. I just want you to work with it. And I think there are five useful steps. First, you have to notice it. And if you go back to my shadow work video, I've explained a few steps there also, but I'll just repeat them here as well with a few more modifications. First, you have to notice, then you have to name it, understand it, regulate it, and choose it. Okay. How do you notice it? The first step is simply recognizing what is happening. When something activates you, something triggers you, instead of immediately reacting, pause and ask, what am I feeling? And, you know, usually, like again, I mentioned, in that episode as well, um, that every time, you're triggered, it's a beautiful, beautiful place to be in because you can start asking questions. Okay. So, whenever you're triggered or you feel like something has been activated, start noticing, start recognizing what is happening. Okay. Ask yourself, what am I feeling? Maybe you're angry, jealous, afraid, ashamed, envious. Don't judge that emotion, just notice it. Okay. And then give it a name. You can say that a fearful part of me is activated, or I'm noticing a jealous part of me right now. Or sometimes you can just say, I can notice that I'm afraid. I'm feeling, this specific emotion of fear. And this creates, some psychological distance. You are experiencing the emotion, but you are not reducing your entire identity to the emotion. You are more than the part that is currently activated. And then understand, you know, try to understand that part, try to become curious. Understanding always requires, asking more questions. Try to ask yourself, what is this emotion trying to tell me? What am I afraid of? What do I need? What boundary might have been crossed? What desire is underneath this? Let's for example, I'll give you one example. Let's return to, the fear of not being liked. Perhaps you notice that you are people pleasing. Now, instead of simply telling yourself to stop, ask yourself why. Maybe you discover that underneath it is the belief that if people don't like me, I'll be alone. Right now, you found something deeper. Then you need to regulate. Once you understand what's happening, don't necessarily act immediately. Give yourself space. Take a walk, regulate yourself, write down your thoughts, drink some water, breathe, sit with the feeling, talk to someone you trust. Let yourself come out of the most activated state before deciding what to do. And sometimes regulation simply means giving yourself, enough time that you can respond rather than react. And once you are regulated, choose. Choose what to do with this information. Ask yourself, what do I want to do with this information? If it is anger, and if, let's say, it is telling you that boundary has been crossed, perhaps you need to communicate the boundary. If jealousy is revealing insecurity, perhaps you need to acknowledge the insecurity rather than controlling someone else. If envy is showing you something you deeply desire, perhaps you can turn that information into motivation. If fear is telling you that you're terrified of being disliked, perhaps you can begin practicing the experience of disappointing someone and discovering that you can survive it. And this is where shadow work actually becomes practical. You don't just understand the shadow, you learn how to respond to it differently. And remember, the goal isn't to become perfectly regulated. Um, I also don't think we should turn regulation into another way of, judging ourselves. Oh, I'm not regulated. You will still get triggered. You will still have moments where you react instead of respond. You will, even after understanding, if even after having, the knowledge of of it all, you will still discover parts of yourself that you haven't understood. And sometimes you'll only realize afterwards that, oh, that wasn't really about what was happening in front of me. Something much deeper was being activated. That's okay. The goal isn't to become someone who never feels anger, never feels, jealousy or fear or envy, shame or FOMO for that matter. The goal is to become someone who has more awareness, more choice. Maybe you used to spend days obsessing over whether someone, disliked you. And now you notice the fear within an hour. Maybe you used to react immediately when you were angry. And now you know how to take space. That's progress. Maybe you used to say yes because you were afraid of disappointing people. And now you can tolerate someone being unhappy with your decision. That's growth. Not the absence of difficult emotions, but the ability to experience them without being completely controlled by them. Okay. The more you know yourself, the less you fear yourself. And I think this is uh, where my own experience has brought me. The more I understand my shadows, the less frightened I become of them. If I know that I have a fear of being disliked, I don't have to spend my whole life trying to make everyone like me. If I know that I have FOMO, fear of missing out, I don't have to obey every urge to check what's happening. If I know that I can become jealous, I don't have to pretend that jealousy doesn't exist. If I know that I have anger, I don't have to be ashamed of being angry. I can simply say to the emotion, I see you, I understand that you're here. Now let me decide what I want to do with you. And perhaps that's what becoming Fearless actually means not that you never experience fear, not that you never have shadows, but that you become less afraid of looking at yourself honestly. You know, there is a beautiful idea, spiritual idea actually, that the journey inward is the journey home to yourself. And I think there's something profound in that. We spend so much of our lives looking outward for answers, for validation, connections, certainty, approval, and sometimes, even identity. Our identity is often tied to our circle, the kind of people I hang out with, the kind of job I do. But perhaps some of the answers we're looking for begin with a much quieter question: who am I when I stop running away from myself? So, are you being yourself or are you dysregulated? So the next time you find yourself asking the same, the next time you find yourself saying, "Oh, this is just who I am," pause for a moment. Ask yourself whether you're actually expressing your authentic self or whether a frightened, angry, jealous, ashamed, wounded part of you has taken over. Ask yourself whether you're setting a boundary or punishing someone, whether you're being vulnerable or demanding that someone else regulate you, whether you're expressing an emotion or acting it out. And most importantly, ask yourself, what is this part of me trying to tell me, and what do I want to do with that information? Because I don't think the goal of shadow work is to get rid of our shadows. I don't think emotional regulation means becoming perfectly calm all the time, polished or pleasant all the time. I think the goal is much deeper. It is to know ourselves honestly enough that we can acknowledge every part of ourselves without allowing every part of ourselves to run our lives. We can have fear without allowing fear to make every decision. We can have anger without using it to hurt people. We can experience jealousy without becoming controlling. We can experience envy without becoming bitter. We can feel shame without turning that shame against ourselves or others. We can want power without needing to dominate. We can feel all sorts of emotions, but we don't have to act on them. We can know our shadows without being slaves to them. And perhaps that's the question I want to leave you with. Next time, ask yourself, are you being yourself or are you being dysregulated? Ask yourself in every situation where you feel yourself, right? Because your shadow can be a part of you uh, in that moment. Maybe it is, acting out in that moment. And if you pay attention to that, it can teach you, it can reveal something about you, it can show you where you still need healing, but it doesn't have to be in charge of you. You can feel it, understand it, regulate it, and then choose what to do. And perhaps that's what it really means, to become yourself.